Hey, CNC, thanks for checking this out. Thanks for taking some time to think about teaching strategies, in particular, active learning as a broad umbrella, as something you can hopefully add to your toolkit to use with learners to get them engaged, excited, motivated, working in different ways. This self-guided course is set up in two modules, and we'll kind of introduce it here today and get you into the first piece of learning so you can do some activities to start to see which strategies may be real and relevant to you, and we'll move on from there and to get you looking at the nuts and bolts of how to use them and how to apply them. So here, um, what else do you need to know? Yeah, this is all about kind of what's going to be meaningful for you, what's going to set you up for success, how it's going to help you out. So this first module kind of starts with why, right? Why active learning? What's the value for me, for my students, where they're at, what we're doing? Uh, why? Why should I even care, right? Um, the way we want to go about this is looking at how we can engage learners, as engagement for me and I think for us is a big part of the why. How we can help learners develop skills, that's another side of the why. um, and then how would you articulate that? There'll be opportunity for you to kind of try that on in terms of yourself defining and communicating in some shared activities, some collaborative activities. What do you see as the value for learners and for teaching in active learning strategies? To start with kind of framing, like what is active learning? This is a definition I've gone back to, and you'll see it's an oldie but a goodie from '91. Bonwell and Eison, working in kind of defining active learning broadly. They talked about getting learners doing things and thinking about what they are doing. Right, kind of contrasting this with maybe more passive forms of learning where we're maybe more consuming. This is about, anything that puts this learner in an active position to be involved, to be contributing, to be working on something towards something with others. You'll see kind of by virtue of these first three examples what this could look like broadly as some broad strategies. And then throughout the second module, we'll get into and what about you and your discipline and your approach to teaching and learning, the types of courses you work in. What does it look like there? So again, this why then, a big part of this why is about engagement, is about how do we get students engaged? Why does that matter? Why is it useful? Um, this is adapted from work of Garrison, Anderson, and Archer, where they define this model as the community of inquiry. And they said community of inquiry is all about like the quality learning experiences and the key elements in learning experiences that are meaningful, that are valuable for learners. They were talking about this in the context of the pivot in the late 90s, pivot to more and more online learning, asynchronous and synchronous. And they were actually assessing like transcripts of like what's the interaction, what's the engagement, what are students doing and saying in environments, and how can we distill from that some big kind of categories of the types of interactions we see that are supporting the effectiveness of good classroom learning, quality learning experiences. So I'm going to break this down a little bit because I think for me, these three lenses give us a picture of kind of a holistic or comprehensive learning experience for a learner. If there's opportunity to do these three things, they work in concert toward, that sweet spot of really kind of the overlap of all three of a really engaging, effective learning experience. So we can talk about learners engaging with the content and ways to do that, ways to get them, thinking about the content and thinking about what they're doing with the content. That's part of learner engagement. That's where active learning intersects. We can get learners working with other learners, absolutely. And this is all about like inclusivity in our classrooms and celebrating the diversity of our classrooms and the different experiences the adult learners have that we're working with. How to value those, how to honor those, how to help them connect the classroom with the real life and the real world and their lived experience and their aspirational goals of where they want to get to with this learning. And then also helping learners connect to you as the instructor, as the teacher. There, in so many of these strategies, there's quality opportunities for feedback, for involvement, to coach, to steer, to guide, to shape, to comment on, be a part of the learning experience as well. So we'll see that. That's a big part of the why, is that active learning strategies give opportunities to engage learners in all three of these things really nicely. Second reason I want to set up is kind of this argument for why active learning more so than passive, or in addition to supplementing the maybe other more traditional or passive methods of learning, is that when students are actively engaged, they are practicing skills. They're building skills. And quite often this is a current conversation we're having about the readiness of our graduates for careers, is that we always see gaps in the skills students have. And as our learners grow and change, we see different gaps. We see different strengths, but we see different gaps. So active learning strategies can give you very real opportunities for students to practice, to demonstrate these skills in your classroom with your guidance, with your coaching and support, with your feedback, and maybe even also with the peer feedback and peer support and some great peer examples of what these skills look like. You probably have your own definitions of skills in your discipline that are maybe more meaningful for you. These are some broad Employment and Social Development Canada terms that are useful, and there is, because they're coming from Employment and Social Development Canada, there's a, you know, I want to call it like a labyrinth or maze. There's all kinds of language about how these are articulated across different occupational areas and across different occupational levels, what they mean, what they look like. There's a wealth of resources there to look at. But just broadly, let's talk about skills as we talk about active learning, right? If our students are sitting and passively learning, they're not practicing these skills. But if our students are active, doing things and thinking about what they're doing, they're using these skills. So what does this look like? Let's talk about 3 examples. One quick, easy way to get students active is to use something like a Muddiest Point. And if you were to Google this, you're going to find 100 ways to use this in 100 different disciplines. But really, it's foundationally about you asking the question of what's unclear, right? Maybe you're at a break in a lesson. Maybe you're after part of a lesson. Maybe you're after a lab, an activity. What's unclear? What are you unsure about? What seems unfamiliar, or fuzzy, or where the problem areas, the sticky points? And then you give your learners opportunity to do that, right? They may write it down on their own. They may write it down and hand it in to you on their way out the door. Exit ticket out the door. Like there's names like that for these kinds of things. They might share it with a group. They might share it with the class. But having them articulate that is useful and helpful, and it's one way to get them active, right? Thinking about what they're learning. So this type of work we would say is kind of learner content engagement, right? Now that learner's critically thinking about, do I understand the content right here, right now, from what I've just heard or done or experienced? Do I understand it? Where are the gaps, right? Where are the pinch points, the challenge points? And can I articulate that, right? We're asking them to use that skill of some communication. Can you take the hard part and can you articulate where the challenge is? This might be, for example, after seeing like a demonstration of a new skill. They could be asked about the steps they just saw demonstrated or the technique they just saw demonstrated. And they might be asked, like, what's the challenging point? What's the sticky point you're unsure about? And give an opportunity to write that down. And then you, as a teacher, get to engage. The teacher engagement, the learner to teacher engagement is about how you respond, right? You might hear a whole class of ideas and you might pick a few key things. You might suggest, some of these we're going to build on in the next lesson. Or you might suggest, you know what, I heard some great points. Let's practice that again next time, tomorrow, or right now. Let's go through that again. So you have opportunity then to coach, develop, give feedback, respond to what's going on in your classroom, and that's so useful as well. Communication skills is a big skill we developed. We talked about that. Awesome. There's one. Number 2, think, pair, share. If you may already do something like this, but this is quick and simple and so easily applicable in so many contexts. This is an active learning strategy where it's around learner to learner engagement now. Think, pair, share looks like you asking a question. We might ask, what do you think about Muddiest Point? Where could you see yourself using Muddiest Point? Why do you see value in Muddiest Point? I might ask a prompt like that. I probably have thought about it in advance rather than just coming up with some stuff off the top of my head. Maybe I've written it down. Maybe I know there's some key think, pair, share questions and activities I'm going to use in my lesson or today. And then you give opportunities time to discuss. You might even give them a minute just to think on it themselves. And especially for the introverts in the room, they're going to love and value that time. They might even get more out of that time than the pairing work that they're about to do, because the pairing is about learners now discussing what do I think, what do you think, really listening to one another, some back and forth, time to make sure they hear one another. For the extroverts, they're going to love this, right? But then the share, and the share might be, okay, let's go around, let's make sure everyone gets opportunity to share, and maybe let's hear from a few, or maybe let's hear a few ideas. Great. Are there any different ideas? Anything we haven't heard yet? Such a cool activity, so useful and really pretty quick and easy to just jump in and do. To be honest, I was the kind of teacher who would actually call on people too. Okay, Sally and Jim, I'd like to hear from you too, right? Or hey, Jesse, you've been a little quiet. Do you have anything to share on this one? Um, I think there's time and space where that there's some value to that tension where students know they may be called on. There's some accountability in the classroom. You may have some very anxious learners who you know you're not going to call on in that way, but some of those learners that will occasionally share, but maybe are a little reluctant to, I think it can be a useful way to draw that out and for the learners to know this is an environment that's safe, that's comfortable for us to share ideas, and you have to build that culture and build that environment as you go as well. Um, Oh yeah. So in terms of skill building here, right? Like now, as I said, we're actively listening to one another. We're hearing diverse perspectives. We have to work that out a little bit. Your ideas might be different than mine. We might disagree. We have to work that out a little bit. How can we disagree in a healthy way? Um, there's opportunity to do that, and that's really valuable. Um, Yeah, this think pair share, as I said, primarily about that learner to learner, but you could also build in some learner to content interaction. If this was, for example, after introducing like a skill where there's some steps or a technique where there's some steps, your question might be around, okay, can you write down the steps and which of the steps do you have questions on? So you might be reinforcing the content through an activity like this as well. And that's a valuable way to do it. And then again, if you were to give feedback, there might be some more teacher-learner opportunity for engagement if you were to give feedback into what they share and what they hear. Awesome. Let's look at a third here, just to give you a different look, different flavor. You may have used something like case studies in the classroom or been a part of learning environments that use case studies. Fantastic way to get lots of different kinds of engagement, but a lot of teacher to student engagement. And a lot of that teacher to student, teacher to learner comes in the prep work you do, right? You're selecting the case study, you're selecting the details that are relevant, you're selecting kind of how to communicate it at a level that resonates with where students are at, where learners are at in your course. You're setting them up with activities that are relevant, that are purposeful, that are useful. And then the learner work happens often in groups as they review the case study. I'll say here too, I love to form some mixed groups. I love to select the groups for students rather than allow them to work with their friends or those they're most comfortable with, because often we get a lot of homogeneity in those groups if students are selecting themselves. But I think it's really valuable to get students in some heterogeneous groups. Learners are working together, reviewing the case study, and completing some kind of task. And that task is likely the kind of task where they're going to get some feedback from you. Maybe they submit a draft or they do some revision. Maybe they have to have something approved or vetted, or there's first step that's submitted. So that feedback is part of your teacher learner engagement interaction as well. Yeah, for example, let's say we're talking a management context, we're looking at organizational change. The case study could be an organization just like the types you've looked at, and a change similar to the types you've looked at. And it could be describing the successes and challenges of that change, and students have to decide how to respond, right? What should the organization start doing? What should they stop doing? What could they continue doing? And such a great way to really get learners applying their knowledge and using the skills then of maybe coming to consensus together, some group problem solving. There's a rich opportunity here to do some critical thinking together. Again, dialogue, discussion, communication, listening, lots there that we're talking about and working with. Analysis, right? Part of the problem solving is there could absolutely be analysis. You might give charts, you might give data, you might give tables, you might give some readings. Lots to look at and do. You might give, maybe a historic event. You might give some different news articles, maybe from different perspectives on the event, so we can build that into what learners are doing too. So there's a third example of active learning. But I hope with all of these, you've seen, there's ways to engage learners, lots of different ways with one another, with you, with the content. There's skills that can be developed in such tangible ways to practice, reinforce, develop skills through active learning. And then I hope you see some things that feel valuable for you in your discipline. And I think that's kind of the key thing to take into this next module is where do you see the value, right? Maybe for me, I gravitate toward lots of learner engagement. Because I'm so extroverted and enjoy working with my peers so much, I'm like, let me do that for my students. But they don't all want that, or they don't all want that as a primary type of engagement in the classroom. A lot of them want to engage more with me as the instructor. I could probably be more present as an instructor, sharing experiences in content. Some learners want a lot of that. So where do you see the value for you, for your practice? What can you do with it? I hope you stick around, and I hope you take opportunity to share some ideas with peers, share some examples with peers, and then think through an example of an active learning strategy you could use in your classroom. I think that's where this is going to kind of gain traction for you in your practice, is if you have a chance to do that, and we'll do that in the next module here. So thanks again. Here are the references we used. If you want to do some further reading or just where this is coming from, you'll be able to access that as well. Cheers.